I think that every American should live outside of the United States for a period of time, 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year. And the reason being is because there's a lot of things, a lot of benefits one gains from living outside the country. First of all, it broadens your perspective. I mean, it broadens your perspective of the world. Many people live in their little villages, and they never actually move outside of that little town that they live in, or if they do, they only travel nationally. They go on their vacations in Florida or other places locally here. But living outside the United States gives you a much more broad perspective of the world and of people. Now, there's one thing that I think that is a very important reason for people to live outside of the country, and that is to debunk the stereotypes. We have stereotypes about people in different countries. Those have been perpetuated through the media. They've been perpetuated, through basic stories of people having very superficial contact with foreigners who come to this country. And some of those stereotypes, for example, is French are rude. And those kind of sentiments have been expressed by people who've had very superficial contact with those people, but if you go to those countries and actually live there to see how people live and to really get a feel for their lifestyle and their perspective, it really does, it helps to debunk a lot of the stereotypes. We have stereotypes of people, for example, in Africa as being savage, and these things are perpetuated by the media. Every time we see an African, they're out in the jungle and they're doing something, chasing lions or something like this. This is not true. If you go to Africa, you realize most people live in the city. They drive, they drive cars. They live in lifestyles that are not terribly different than our own. Yes, of course, there are differences, and that's what makes it a rich experience. But those stereotypes that have been ingrained in the heads of Americans need to be debunked. And the only way that you can really get rid of those stereotypes is to actually go to those places, spend time with those people, and really see how they live. Now, another benefit one gets when you travel abroad is that it gives you more options. If you've lived in another country, you start to see that, hey, boy, these people live not so. I mean, they have an interesting way of life that you may like. Oftentimes, people get so used to America they think, I could never think about living someplace else. I could never think about living outside the United States, away from my family. But if you actually do it, if you challenge yourself to go live abroad for 6 months, what you might find is, hey, boy, this is a really cool place, and I like the way these people live. And it gives you more options about maybe even career choices. You think that, boy, well, I got to think about jobs in the United States. If you go to another country, spend time there, you start to see that there may be some other possibilities to actually work abroad and work in a career choice that you would never even think of had you not had that experience. And another thing is it also enhances one's appreciation for other cultures. There is a richness that comes from going to other places and seeing how they live, how they eat. It develops your appreciation for food. The best thing about traveling is to experience other food. I mean, we here in America, when we think about American cuisine, we have to realize that American cuisine really is kind of limited. We have McDonald's, we have fast food. That's the American contribution to world cuisine. When we think about food in the United States, we usually think about food from other cultures, Chinese food, or just other cultures, Italian food. And what happens is we get a very small sampling in this country of the types of food that people eat in those countries. So if you actually travel to those countries, you'll realize that the Italians make more than spaghetti. They have a lot of different foods that we never see in the Italian restaurants, because the Italian restaurants in America have been kind of designed, or they've brought over what fits American tastes. So therefore, we as Americans get a very limited sampling. But when you go to Italy, or when you go to any other country, you get to see a broader variety of food. And it's interesting to see the food, because how they sell the food. I remember one experience where I was in France, and they actually, it's different, not to say better or worse, but when you go to buy a chicken, they keep the claws on the chicken so that you know that what you're buying is a real chicken. And it's a different thing. It's a different way of buying chicken, perhaps, but it's interesting. want to buy rabbit, which is very popular in Paris, is they have the whole bunny right there in the cooler in the store. So you go in there, and it's something different. And the thing is people believe in those countries. They believe in freshness. They want only you have to know that it's the rabbit was killed today. So only the freshest rabbits are sold, and you know it's fresh because the whole thing is right there and it was just killed. So these are some of the great things about going to other countries is actually eating different foods. And also for a short time in Africa, I was privileged to go and eat with a family, and everyone eats with their hands. And this was a new experience for me, that you eat with your hands, and there's a certain protocol about that you eat your hands, and it's okay to eat with your hands, but you can't actually lick your hands. So there's certain protocols you learn, and what those things do is when you go to those other cultures, you have those experiences, you become more sensitive about meeting those people even in these countries. You become more sensitive about things that are everyday occurrences there that you would otherwise not be responsive to, perhaps. For another example is Japanese people. They have this wonderful exchange of business cards. It may be something you don't really pay attention to in this country when you meet a Japanese person, but when they meet you, they give you a business card. And if you ever notice when you give a business card to a Japanese person, they take your card and they read it, and they read everything on it, and then they might put it away. Oftentimes we get a business card from a person, and we just take the card because we're talking to the person, we don't think anything of it, we pop it in our pocket. That kind of thing is perhaps a rudeness to another culture in terms of they feel like you're not paying attention to something that's important to us. So again, when we travel, we learn sensibilities about other people. We learn how to interact with them, and it makes us more polite in a sense, because what we in America might consider polite, a person in another culture might consider quite rude. For example, in some cultures, shaking hands with your left hand is considered rude because of what they feel like the uses for the left hand are not sanitary, and therefore to offer someone your left hand is actually a rudeness. And again, another wonderful benefit of traveling abroad, and it's essential that one does, is to get a global view of the world. Oftentimes when we're involved in things like the current war, or we tend to look at it from our perspective. We tend to look at it from the American perspective that says we're righteous in what we do because we're a just people. But when you actually travel abroad, when you live abroad, you start to become aware of other opinions that others have of America. And so you start to see yourself as an American very differently, because you don't see yourself just as this person who we live in this island called America and everything we do is right. We realize that other people might not see what we do as so just and so fair and so right all the time. And sometimes when we look at other cultures, we might see something that they do as puzzling to us. We say that, hey, this doesn't make sense. Why would these people do this? Why wouldn't they support us in a war? Why wouldn't they do these things? But to actually stand on their shores and look back at America, and you get a different sense about why they would maybe not support us, or why they wouldn't get involved with something we're doing, and even condemn what we're doing because of the sensibilities of their cultures. So when one travels abroad, it really completes an education. Many times we feel that when we go to a 4-year institution, we do our education, we do our general studies, we read about different people, we read about different cultures, but we've never really experienced it. And what you have on paper is very different than what you have in the flesh. And so by traveling abroad, by living with the people, by eating food, drinking what they drink, having conversations with them, and understanding how they see themselves, and also how they see us, it's a very rich experience. I realized that as a person who is not the patriotic American, I went abroad and I found myself the biggest defender of my own country. So what it is when we go abroad, we become ambassadors. We become ambassadors for our own country, whether we want to accept that or not, whether we agree with the political philosophies of our country or not. It is where we live, and there are people who are in other countries who suffer from the same lack of experience and lack of exposure to other cultures. They've never been to America. They don't know how Americans live. They only see America from the perspective of the media. And so by us going there, we also teach them as well. So we become ambassadors. We broaden our perspective, our horizon. We become much more global. We debunk stereotypes. We open our choices in terms of ability to travel and the ability to live other places. So all these things are essential for us to be well-rounded individuals. And so I'm absolutely convinced that every American needs to travel abroad, and not only travel superficially, but actually live there, penetrate the culture, be there enough time to actually understand how people live. And I think that it's an invaluable experience, and if one doesn't do it, they kind of, I think it retards their development. It limits them in some way. So that's my suggestion. Everyone should travel abroad, and everyone should have that experience.